Thank you all for coming. After seeing that ING talk, I think this is going to seem like small beans as far as teams, processes, and stuff. But really appreciate you all coming. My name is Jared Reyes, and I'm privileged to serve on the team that built Twilio documentation. And the talk's called How Twilio Writes Documentation, but it should be really called How Twilio Builds Documentation. Because today I'd like to explain how our philosophy at Twilio has evolved over the last 2 years, to not think of documentation as an auxiliary tool to products, something that describes products and helps developers use them, but as a core product itself. And in fact, a core feature and a core part of the developer experience when a developer begins using Twilio or is even just entering their journey as a developer. And how by making this shift to be a product team, we were able to build better docs with the help of our community by following the processes that a lot of engineers and developers like yourselves have been doing for decades, the kind of methods that we've perfected. And I think by making that shift, we were able to build something a little compelling. I'd love to tell you about that. But first, actually, I'd like to just tell you a little story about myself that I think illustrates a key pillar of our philosophy. So I'm a father of a 2-year-old, which means for the first time in my life, I'm terrified of everything. I'm terrified that he's going to run off a cliff, get eaten by a dog. But mostly I'm terrified that he's going to run out of our front door into the street. So I thought, I'm an engineer, I'll fix this. I'll build a fence. So I did what anyone would do when they're going to build a fence. I went to the library and I checked out a book and I read about carpentry and the basics of framing and woodworking and how to build a fence. No, I didn't do this at all. I actually went to Google like any modern dad would do. And I found a YouTube video of a carpenter who, for the last 37 years, has probably read every book in the library about carpentry and was able to distill all of his knowledge into this very quick video that explained exactly how to build the fence, everything I needed to buy. And lo and behold, 2 days later, I had a fence. Because when faced with the challenge of building a fence, I had gone with the fastest route possible to get the information I needed. And this is something we all do. It's called information foraging. But over the last 2 years, the team at Twilio that I'm on, called Developer Education, has discovered that developers are by far the best cohort at information foraging. They're busy people, they need to get information quickly, and they know how to scan a page quickly for the information that's relevant to them. But 3 years ago, when I joined Twilio, we took the big book approach of documentation. Like a lot of other companies out there, we saw documentation as a tool to explain products. We saw it as a way to tell you, this is the best practices for using our product, and these are all the methods you can use, but also this is the abstract of why we even built it and how it's going to make your business better. And we had boiled it down into taxonomies and chapters, and we organized it by product. And we thought this was the right approach, but we also had a hypothesis that maybe a separate team, a ragtag bunch of developers, could maybe figure out a better way. And sure enough, we started a team called Developer Education, and we were focused on really just making documentation better. But early on with this team, we made an important decision not to just go in our closet and write a better book, but to actually form ourselves around a product and to think of ourselves as a product team. I think this was an important shift, and it'll kind of illustrate that as I talk more. But the first thing that any product does when they're deciding to build the perfect solution for their users is to talk to their users. So we went and talked to our developers. And a large part of developers thought our documentation was fine. It was doing a great job of getting them up and running with Twilio. But when we started to ask customers to do something in front of us, we started doing actual user interviews and user testing. We observed behavior that did not match that language. People were saying it was great, but when they were using it, they were showing us that, in fact, it was a huge piece of friction in their workflow. We had a homepage that was organized like this. We had some content types. We had a right nav. We had navigation across the top. And we'd ask developers, you're on Twilio docs. Show us how you would receive a call in Python. And they would start clicking around. They wouldn't necessarily find what they needed. But we saw some very interesting behavior when they finally did. They would scroll immediately down the page to the code. And they would look at the code and be like, oh, this does it. Oh, wait, no, that doesn't do it. And then they would back out. They'd look at the right nav, but they wouldn't use it. Then they'd look at our hierarchy, and they wouldn't use that either. And in the end, what they ended up doing was leaving Twilio going to Google, typing in how to receive a call in Python, and then a Twilio page would come up and they would find what they were looking for. And we saw this time and time again. And the thing that really stuck out to us was that developers are just really fast web users. Like, they go to pages so quick, they're using Command F to find stuff, they're like keyboard shortcuts all over the place. And we knew this because we were developers, but we were still thinking of documentation as this thing you write, not this thing you build. And when we started talking to developers, it became clear that the number one asset on our documentation was our code samples, and that this code was giving those developers all the context they needed to make a decision about whether this page had the information that they were foraging for. So they would look at the page, they'd see a bit of code sample, they'd skip the heading altogether. It could say you receive a call in Node. They'd find the code, they'd be like, oh, this is in Node. This is not what I'm looking for. This isn't Python. And they'd immediately back out. But we thought maybe we could build a better experience if we just started from the beginning and made a product roadmap, and we said, let's do that. So the first thing we wanted to do is we want to establish a baseline. We had a hypothesis that code should be first and central to all of our documentation, but we needed to know if that data was backed up by data. We also knew that we wanted to experiment right out of the gate and find if there's another content type that we could introduce that would do a better job of getting specifically our enterprise developers and our developers who were working in a product full-time to production quicker. So, starting with establishing a baseline, we looked at a time on page of the docs. At the point we were using Google Analytics. And the time on page is just an indicator of a page's effectiveness. It's not necessarily the golden standard or anything. But this is just one example of the data that I'm going to show you, because we compared a lot of different metrics. We segmented them by how many sentences of prose were before a code sample. And when we bifurcated the data that way, we saw that if a page had less than 4 sentences of prose before a code sample, it performed twice as well as a page that had over 11 sentences before that first code sample. And it turns out that 11 sentences is still above the fold, what people would tell you is above the fold. But it has it's a mental block more than it is not being able to see code. It tells the developer that this page has a lot to say, and they have a lot to do. So they don't necessarily want to spend the time to read what you have to say. And we saw this across session length. We saw this across page depth. Anytime that there was a lot of prose on a page and there wasn't a lot of code, that page did not perform well. So we listened to our developers and we had established a baseline of data. It was time to experiment. So we decided to look at which parts of the docs were not performing well, and it turns out the how-tos, that thing I showed you earlier where the developer scrolled down, that was actually called a how-to, and it was supposed to tell the developer if you're building appointment reminders for your dentist office, this is how you would do it. Except we gave them a zip file with all of the code that they would need, and we'd only had about 10 of them, and they were across 2 or 3 different languages. And they said, well, this can definitely improve. Not many people are seeing these. Let's see if we can turn this into an active part of the docs. So, lest you think this is all just like a sunshine success story, this was the first iteration of the thing that we came up with. And we really just scrapped this together in a few weeks. Kind of across the board, everyone thought it kind of looked horrible. But we were testing for some of our assumptions. We wanted to know if we gave them full code samples as opposed to like little tiny snippets, if we gave them full pages of code, maybe a controller and maybe a model, and then maybe if we annotated that, let's see what would happen. And developers immediately called out, well, this is nice to have like a full code, but it's not the IDE I use. It doesn't even look like the IDE I use. It's got tabs. There's all this prose at the top that I don't necessarily even care about. This is like doing something, but it's not doing the right thing. And so another 3 weeks, we had another iteration. And this iteration, we, again, sat down with people on video. We asked them to do basic tasks. And they were very confused about this diagram. What does this mean? This is another example of us being too in our heads about what we thought Twilio was and what we thought you needed to know. And developers know what they need to know. They just want to find a solution. So telling them that this is the right kind of like application stack or the right sort of way to think about their end product is not very valuable to them when they're in the middle of a legacy code and they just need to like update a controller to do something. So they also pointed out that we moved all our prose to the right-hand side, and that was kind of weird. And we did another iteration, and we had all sorts of feedback about the Heroku button, which was another place where we thought we were adding a ton of value by deploying to Heroku. And it just turned out that developers were like, it's just not the solution I'm going to end up using, so why would I deploy this and just call it done? We finally ended up with Twilio tutorials. After 4 iterations and over a year of work, we had listened to developers and worked with them on every iteration to come up with something that was right. We got a lot of positive feedback about this. People were saying, this is the future of what I want to browse my sample apps in. And in the end, they ended up just being these big sample apps. There's over 140 of them now, and they are in every language and framework that Twilio supports. And they are fully production-ready applications, so you can go to GitHub and browse the entire code yourself without ever bothering to read our thoughts on it. But if you so care to, we also annotate each part of the app that we think is an important building block of getting this use case up and running. And sure enough, when we looked at the data of launching these tutorials, we saw that our users went up 350%, our session length went up by 2 minutes, and our pages per session was 3x what the old how-tos were doing. So we had found success. We had turned an underperforming part of the documentation into one of our most active parts of the site. So we had kind of a playbook now that we could run with, and it was proving to us that thinking of ourselves as a product team and thinking of docs as a core developer experience was definitely what developers wanted. So we had other problems to figure out at this point. We had basically found an experiment that had worked. Now we needed to find some internal tools that would help us to scale the amount of content that we could make. The one barrier to this, to re-engineering kind of the platform that docs were built on, was that in order to get documentation into production, you had to check out a repo, you had to edit some PHP, edit some Markdown, you had to open PR, do all that stuff, and then you had to get it into the deploy pipeline, which was rigorous and took multiple days. It was not a great way to deploy docs. So we said, cool, we need to find a CMS. We need to make sure every team in Twilio can contribute to the docs. And Andrew Baker, one of our developers, took the lead here and found this amazing CMS. Excuse me. It was that singing this morning. Totally did me. Wagtail is a CMS built on Python and Django, managed by another small team in Philly. And the core feature of Wagtail for us was the stream field. Oh, this is going to be rough, guys. Hope you're in it for the long haul. The stream field allows us to build features into our documentation, custom features that allow authors to put dynamic types into the content. An example here is the code sample, which is a dynamic code sample that pulls from GitHub and allows them to search the entire repo of code samples that we've authored. Oh boy. Or page group, which is actually a navigational element where people can select pages that were also authored in the CMS, and it'll create a table of contents for them. So this was a huge killer feature for us, and it meant that we could immediately scale to allow every team in Twilio to build the documentation with us. Another important decision we made at this point was to host all of our code snippets on GitHub. And by doing that, we allow not only our own developers and every other team at Twilio to contribute, but eventually everyone in the world. By organizing our API snippets this way, we make sure that not only are we doing the code the right way, because all of you will check us and make sure we are, but we are also able to pull it dynamically using the GitHub API into our authoring interface, which has been amazing. One more note about tools. We use Optimizely for A/B testing. We use usertesting.com for the videos. Can you turn me up a little bit? Usertesting.com for the videos. We use Mixpanel and Google Analytics for metrics, and we use Heap as well. And then you saw we use GitHub and Wagtail. If you want to talk about any of those tools after the talk, come find me in the reception, which we are almost to, if I don't cough one more time. We had re-engineered, we had established a baseline, we had found an experiment that worked. It was time to redesign the experience because we had all these other problems that developers had identified. Developers had identified that whole navigation problem, that whole search problem. And so we took our best stab at solving that with the help of the design team at Twilio, which in my opinion is world class. Nathan Sharp gets all credit for this upcoming design, but I'm going to switch to my screen mirroring and show you where we're at. And at this point, we kind of see the docs as a living, breathing beast that's going to change over time. But we've at least established a framework where we know we can experiment and user test to find the right solution. So you'll notice right away on the home page that we anticipate the developer's needs by asking them what language they're coding in and what product they want to learn more about. This allows us to save some information about the developer we didn't know before and make sure that they don't have to leave our site to get the information that's most valuable to them. You'll also notice that we have a new homepage that shows all of our new content. But right now, what I'd like to show you is what happens if a developer comes here and chooses PHP, SMS, wants to learn a little bit more about sending SMS. They come into the tutorial experience, which I talked about before. They can click through. They can see nice annotated code. And to boot, we wanted to make sure that our content was responsive. And responsive is kind of a buzzword. Everyone knows that. But when we think about responsive, we think about the developer workflow, and we think about the developer experience. And we think the developer experience is the points of friction that we were seeing was not just not being able to use our navigation. It was also just going from their IDE to our site. In a lot of cases, they were going from a dark Vim environment or whatever text editor they're using and going to our very light site. So we added a theme switcher, which if we go into any of these pieces of content, we can see that not only does it change the background of the pros so that their light environment is the same as they were working in, but the code changes as well to match their dark coding environment. And these are the code snippets I was talking about before. They're populated by a stream field. It's just as easy as searching for status callback if you wanted to implement this as an author. But we also think responsiveness is making code a first-class citizen. So on a full-screen window, you now have code in a third rail. It's omnipresent. If there's code on a page, it will be in this third rail. Not only that, but if you're just interested in seeing all of the code associated with status of an SMS, you can just click through these samples and see all of the different code samples used in this product. What I'm showing you right now is actually a brand new piece of content that we shipped last week called Guides. And Guides is the kind of last step of us establishing this playbook of trying to discover if we could use this playbook that worked for tutorials and roll out new content that served developers. And sure enough, we are seeing very, very positive feedback on this. And in fact, a 10% increase in a lot of these metrics that we track, especially pages per session and time on page, for anyone who visits Guides in their session. So we're really excited about this content type, and we think that we're getting close to really getting down this product team mentality. The last thing I'll show you is that we actually have made sure that our search experience beats Google. So if you search send message with an image, Google would give you a page, probably for Twilio or some other company, and you wouldn't necessarily see the code. But if I'm working and I've got a window open in my IDE and I'm just trying to find a little code snippet that would send SMS, I've already chosen PHP at some point in my life here. So immediately it populates a PHP code sample that I can just copy and drop into my IDE. So we think, in general, this is getting to the place where we are feeling really good about our processes. But we have a lot more to do, and it's going to take working with you all and getting all your feedback to figure out where are our next blind spots. What are the areas that are still friction in your workflow? Because taking the big book approach actually made sense a while back, right? Because we were thinking of our products as the thing you were coming for. And we were thinking of documentation as the thing to describe that. And in fact, we're all used to telling the stories of the things that we work on. And we wanted to tell the story of the things we were building. But we forgot that developers are working and they have their own experiences. And it's very different from what we think is necessarily important. And we needed to discover that by just working with them a little bit more closely. And in general, developers are too busy to read. If you're writing documentation, just remember this. They want code. They want to get back to work. And code is all they need to figure out if this page has the information that's valuable to them. So we put code first. We worked with developers to find solutions that worked for them. And we shifted our philosophy completely to see docs not as a separate from the products, but as a product itself and fundamental to the developer experience. And in doing so, we opened a dialogue with the builders who are using our products every day. And every single day, they're enriching our work, which is, for me, kind of the pinnacle of my job. We all know developers have more to do than coding, so the point of this was let's help them get back to work. Thank you all very much. Sorry for the coughing. If you want to come talk to me about tooling or get into the data behind this talk, come find me in the in the reception area, and I'd be happy to chat with you. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.